Salam and hello, everyone. This is Lilly. And as you know, we're taking a little break, but we are bringing you a best of series. And I have to say, this episode is one of my favorites. My husband, Dr. Benjamin Piper, the director for global education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, came on the show, and we did talk about his work in education, but we also talked about parenting our 4 beautiful kids, the life that we've built in East Africa, as me as an Ethiopian immigrant, himself as an African American, and kind of what that's meant, what our struggles have been, the path that we're trying to create for our family moving forward. And I just loved it. I loved talking with my husband. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode too and learn something. He really highlights how powerfully important us engaging rural communities in Africa are, which is why we called this episode Power in the Culture. So enjoy this episode with my love, Dr. Benjamin Piper.
Think about it, though. How many geniuses that Africa needs, Kenya, Ethiopia needs, exist in rural Africa, that because of the lower quality of education outcomes in those areas, it's not just that individual child doesn't have the opportunity, isn't doing everything they could do, it's that the country suffers because of the kind of loss of human capital.
Salam and hello, everyone. My name is Lilly Piper, and I am so glad that you've tuned in today. This week on the show is a mashup of the personal and professional for me. I'm really delighted that you've tuned in because you'll get to hear the voice and the interview with my husband, Dr. Benjamin Piper. If you are new to my show, you may not know that my family and I have lived here in East Africa for the last 16 years, 4 years in Ethiopia, and the last 12 in Nairobi. And my family is a blended family. My husband is Black American. Myself, I'm an Ethiopian immigrant. And we have forged this life together really almost as an unexpected experiment of coming back to the continent to build a life and to build family together. And of course, Ben has been a big part of that story. So I wanted to have him on the show to talk about a few things, about our path here of coming home to Ethiopia and then eventually Kenya, of growing our family here and raising our kids here. Our kids range in age from 20 to 15, and we have been here for 16 years. So we didn't plan on this life, but it's been a beautiful one. And it's been nice to kind of reflect on what it's been meant to us to raise kids on the continent as both members of the diaspora as well as Black Americans. In addition to that, Ben is an educational researcher. He is the director for global education for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in his work, he has written and thought deeply about international education policy. So we talk a bit about that on the show as well, what it's meant for him as an education researcher to spend all really of his professional life here on the ground, working with governments and communities to try and improve learning outcomes and returns for both families and children, as well as large-scale programs. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. It is something that I've been looking forward to, and also, a little way for me to offer my listeners a chance to get to know me better and understand kind of why I do this work, why I want to tell the stories I want to tell. Because this place, this continent, this region is both deeply personal to me and also a place that I've been privileged to build a professional path and a path that I've built with my hubby, Ben. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with my husband, Dr. Benjamin Piper. Enjoy. Honey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's been a long and waited invitation, but glad to be here.
Yes, if you're new to Salam and Hello, you may not know that I had a previous show called Uproot, which I did, I think, 37 episodes. And you were actually invited to come to one of those episodes, but on a panel of other guests. So this is your first solo interview here.
So that was
welcome,
1% of Uproot. And
you were 1%, but now you got
it here.
Welcome to the show. But maybe you can tell the listeners a little bit more about your professional work. What do you do? What brought you to the continent?
Yeah, I think we've been together for living in the continent for 16 years. And while we were, doing family together professionally, I was initially came for data collection for my dissertation back in Ethiopia. And I remember it was a 1-year fellowship. We were just going to be here to collect data and then go back. But then once you move to this part of the world and you see both the power in the culture, the power in the way that Ethiopians initially did family and did life together that kind of was much more rich than the kind of the US style of just my immediate family is all that matters. Anyway, we fell in love with being there, and well, wasn't Ethiopia wasn't always so easy, but we fell in love with so much of it, and 1 year became now 16. So I started off doing dissertation data collection, then eventually started working for an international NGO in the education sector, doing some of the first assessments of learning outcomes of countries here in East Africa, the first assessments of reading outcomes in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya was my first kind of job in 2008 to 11. And it was a heartbreaking story given the real expansion of education access in this part of the world and families really investing their time, resources. We were laughing about sending kids off to school a moment ago, just how much people believe in education, but the outcomes are bad. And the outcomes are much worse than the skill level of the kids.
Right.
So there has been a mismatch in those outcomes. So for the last 12 years or so, I'm getting the numbers wrong, been trying to work on education improvement programs at medium and then national scale here in Kenya at national scale, and then now globally with this real issue of families are investing in putting their kids in school, and the data says that they're not getting the outcomes that they deserve, and it's not the kids. Teachers are well-meaning. There's some systematic mismatches between that skill level and the outcomes. So that's the problem we're trying to solve, trying to contribute to solve. Anyway, so excited about some of the progress, but I don't think we would have it any other way. Once we came to this part of the world and saw the talent level and expertise that exists here, being able to kind of give it a bigger window and being able to support them and those movements has been exciting for me.
Well, I'm going to come back to a lot of things you said around the power of the culture and the mismatch between investment of families and skills and outcomes. I'm going to come back to all of that. But I want to come to what you said at the end, which is this idea of, seeing the skill level here and realizing how much there was to offer here. I knew what was to offer here all along because this is not new to me, being Ethiopian and coming from that culture and immigrating to the U.S. as a kid. But you are not African per se. You are African American. Born and raised in Cleveland,
Definitely.
Ohio.
Yes, very proud.
So let me go ahead and say that before you jump on the mic and start talking about Northeast Ohio.
It's
yes,
important
Ben,
for people to know.
Listen, not everybody knows you on this podcast, so they're going to start wondering why you're talking about Ohio so much. So let me just pause here because I think it's something that is a big part of our story. This idea of blending a life of a Black American experience in the U.S. with an Ethiopian immigrant. 30 years in the US for me, so a long time, not insignificant. And then building a life here back on the continent. It's been a journey for us.
Yeah.
And there have been many moments where we thought we would go back. We have 4 kids ranging in age now from, how old is our oldest? 20? 20. Our youngest is 15. So we've been here a long time. Tell me from your perspective what you've learned about yourself as a Black American, having spent all these years now in the continent.
Yeah, I think we can go back to university where I had the opportunity to actually visit Africa for the first time, a small trip near Nyahururu when I was 20 years old, and just really fell in love with that part of the country and the life of rural Kenyans and the community that they create that is very different than I grew up.
Because you were growing up in a semi-urban setting.
Called Cleveland, Ohio.
Called Cleveland, Ohio, but a very large high school, 2,000 people in your high school, went to a small liberal arts college, and then you spend a summer in Western Kenya.
So it's a very different world, right? So we were dating at the time, so you were playing up how wonderful Africa was, but I had to see it for myself. And it was a very different world. And I think there's parts of your calling from God and your life that even if you haven't experienced it, when you see it, that just something in your heart kind of resonates. So I just would be honest with you that being in Kenya for those, I remember 6 weeks or so, just felt right and felt like home, even though I'd never been there. Now, as an African American, it's such a different world than I grew up in and a different culture, but that you could just feel some of your kind of fundamental calling being connected
What
to
was
it.
different to you?
This kind of overlaps with getting to know your family even before we got married. Just the way that this is predominantly Kikuyu culture, right? So the way that the family matters more, and the definition of family is very different than the U.S. Family means obviously there's a we talked about this a lot in your family. Like, is this
I know what you're going to say.
I have to say, is it a cousin or a play cousin?
See, okay, so for
on the black side
the
of the
black
family,
people listening to this in America, we know there is such a thing as play cousins. I don't know if play cousins exist in Africa,
right?
But it's this term that you're not related by blood, but they're your cousin, right?
So as an African American,
Africa, it's the same thing. We don't call it play cousins, but they're just your cousins. You grew up with them. You may or may not be related biologically, but does it matter? It does not.
It actually does matter. It doesn't matter. You really love them. I just want to know. I'm just a logical person. I just want to know where
Ben wants to know how far the money needs to go. He wants to know how far does this money and this bread need to go. But anyway, so you were saying the family unit.
So actually the point I'm making is the opposite, that it is the power of that broader, unspecific to family tree relationships that you'll do anything for, that is a better way to live than kind of, okay, you are my uncle, but if you're my great uncle, if you're my second cousin, then that's not really close enough to help out with school fees. That's a very different way of living, right? So that if people here are connected, I know, anyway, now that we pay a couple of people's school fees, that you do wonder, okay, there has to be a breaking point. There is a line.
Okay, now I do need to know.
But anyway, point being that I just think there's so much in this part of the world that Americans struggle. And we talked about this too, that think about poverty. Obviously, there's, GDP per capita, but this is American and Western society is poor in some of the stuff that matters more than GDP per capita.
That's really important. I think you're right. I think when we go back to the U.S. in the summer times, oftentimes to see our extended family, it sticks out to our kids, I think, often. Those differences.
Yeah.
They notice and pick up on things that are lost on us because we did grow up in the U.S. and they have not. They've grown up in this sense of everybody's auntie and uncle, and they know the differences between India and Pakistan, and they have these, like, the minutia of culture is really salient to them. So, in your time, I guess, in blending, again, the professional and the personal, there have been many points where we thought we would go back because we came, like you said, 1 year thinking we're going to do data collection. We had just had our fourth child.
Yeah.
I was very eager to get back to Ethiopia and spend some time there and have the kids spend some time in their culture. I never got to go back as a kid myself. We left when I was 1.5 years because of the communist regime at the time. Even when it was overthrown, there was just never a clear window for our family to go back and spend any significant time other than after we got married. So I was keen to go back. 1 year turns to 2, turns to 3, turns to 4. We spent 4 years in Ethiopia, eventually come to Kenya. But every 2 or 3 years or so, there'd be another opportunity to go back, but we continued to choose to stay. At some point, our kids start to lobby us to stay when they knew these decision points were coming. But let's talk a little bit why we did stay. I think for those in the diaspora, who probably this conversation is more interesting than those who are here on the ground in East Africa. Why for you do you think we stayed?
I think it's when you do the analysis, because I'm a spreadsheet-driven person.
Yes, I like to say he lives a spreadsheet-driven life or Excel-driven life.
Yeah, so we would have to have a different sheet for the interpersonal, non-measurable things that mattered more. And I think, remember, actually, we had one round where the two spreadsheets were saying we should go, but then we took a bigger look at what matters from a family connection, friendship, kind of who your people are. And then that calculation was different. And I think we've been here long enough that the Western way of looking at the world and making decisions is less salient to us. So that kind of like third spreadsheet, which is a little bit more qualitative, made a bigger difference. So anyway, why do we stay? I just think we are privileged to be here. And again, as Americans in a country that has pretty restrictive immigration policies, we have to appreciate that we have been in countries who have been open to us when our countries are not always open back.
Very true.
But I mean, from a purpose point of view, I feel like we can be more helpful in this part of the world. Now, that the bar for that is quite high, because I really do believe in having the people that we're working with take over my job. So that's happened a few times where the job that I had, if I really believe what I say, where Africans, Kenyans, Ethiopians, whatever, have the skill set to do it, they just need to give the opportunity, then that's happened several times. So we just have to keep hopefully making that happen, and also only staying if it makes sense for us from a contribution point of view. The expat thing is easy and nice, and people stay too long. So I've wanted to leave a couple times because I was worried we were getting there, but then new things came up where I feel like, again, we're able to have a window where we can make a difference, and then also build up the skill sets and provide opportunities for Africans, Kenyans, Ethiopians, etc., that to allow them to shine. So I actually feel good about where we are and continuing to stay.
Do you want to ask me why you think we stayed?
Why do you think we stayed?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're supposed to help me out here. I mean, you're not like a normal guest. You're supposed
backwards
to help.
Interview.
I know, my goodness. Well, thank you for asking. Thank you for the question. I actually think we stayed because we wanted to raise Black children in a Black country. I mean, I remember distinctly, I think it's 2014, when Trayvon Martin was killed and the protests started to flare up. I think that's right. Trayvon Martin, was it 2014? I could be wrong. Or it might be Michael Brown. I just remember at certain points having two Black sons thinking, I'm not taking my Black children to that country. Yeah. Because while we had and do have and are blessed to have rich relationships here, our kids have been so blessed to grow up with aunts and uncles here who are not our blood relatives, but who have loved them as they are. We did miss our family. We are blessed to have brothers and sisters and grandparents who are extraordinary. And we did feel that gap of not having them. We do feel it remains to be. I mean, our son is going to the U.S. next week, and it's my sister who's going to drive up from another state to pick him up. I mean, we have these extraordinary family members who have, I think, paid the price for us to be here. But at some point, I remember thinking, I'm not taking my Black sons back here. I felt like their humanity was threatened. Whereas at least here where there definitely is threat of police brutality, especially if you're poor, and that threat remains every day for young Black Kenyans and Ethiopians particularly. I just thought, no, they are protected here in a way, emotionally and psychologically in particular, that they could never be in the U.S. I remember when Barack Obama was elected the second time. For our kids, he's the only president they knew at that point. So for them, the president of the United States was Black. The president of Kenya was Black. The beggar on the corner was also Black. The neighbor who's rich is Black. Their teacher sometimes was Black. The vendor at the grocery store was Black, So for them, in their ecosystem, everybody was Black, which allowed Blackness to be complex and rich and deep. The room for stereotype became very small. Yeah. The stereotypes now became the expat stereotype or the American stereotype, as opposed to, as a Black male, I expect you to jump me. And that to me was such a beautiful, radical option as a parent that I did not know existed before we came here. Because, we both saw our parents struggle with those issues of race raising us, right? You're raised by a single mom in inner city Cleveland, a single white mom. I was raised by Ethiopian immigrants who that race issue was, oh my goodness, like the elephant in the room that we didn't know was in the room. We didn't know what to name it so many times. Yeah. So for us, at least for me, it just became huge.
No, and I think that we did give up something on that. I mean, we in the summers, we try and make sure that our kids spend time with African Americans because it's important for them to feel connected back to the people they'll, if they go to America, they go to college in America, they need to be able to connect with. But I think that's one thing they lost, or have lost over time. But the benefits from, as you said, emotional health point of view, confidence, ability, I'm just thinking about the range of personality types and skill sets amongst our kids is in no small part because they are, as you said, allowed to be uniquely themselves in ways that being an African American in the U.S. and often complex racial environments makes more complicated and more difficult. Growing up in an American high school, predominantly Black, there are kind of contours and lines that inform how you are and how you act. And if you go beyond them, there are some costs. I feel like I think we can say for sure that some of our kids are much, much more themselves than they would be if they had grown up elsewhere.
And yeah, you mentioned kind of what they may have lost in terms of that identity with African Americans. And we have met some here over the years, but you're right. There's something when they go back in the summers, they're having to study and navigate on their own. But for me, I don't know, as an immigrant, I think I was always having to navigate that. So to me, it's a fair trade-off for the beauty having, I think, what they feel are deep roots here. But let's reflect a little bit because our oldest is 20, our youngest is 15. So we're not by any means done parenting, but we are kind of done with those younger, what are those things called? Formative years, I guess. What do you think we got wrong? What would we do differently if we could do it again, especially around this
got a good one.
Black identity and African identity
this is
stuff?
even better than Black identity.
But don't say anything about me.
You can't say that.
Yeah, just to say what you did wrong.
Okay, what we did wrong.
Okay, fine.
I think, you'll love this, Lil.
Oh.
The ability to play and jump around. All the children, their first time falling was with me. Because the parenting of the Ethiopian diasporas, don't run, you'll fall. Don't play, you're going to hurt yourself. So when I was able to extract them from the...
my grip, my thorny, tight grip.
I was just sure, the worry about them falling. They were able to play and they all hit their head once or twice. So
that's your main thing that you think we got wrong?
That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing I want to say, I don't really think there's much we lost. I guess the time with cousins, the time with grandparents, the time with aunts and uncles that are so valuable for kind of formative growth and knowing who you really are, because the kids are influenced by their parents, obviously, but also by their broader family. And we have kind of surrogate family here and close friends. We've really been fortunate and blessed in that way. But I do think you lose when you choose to not be around your
we got a good bit of that and not decent. And these last couple of years, actually, ironically, through the pandemic, COVID kind of stuck us with people, which was a shout out to Hanna out there, staying at our house forever last year, which was beautiful. You know what? I think we did language maybe wrong though.
I know
that's the one thing that I regret. I think
this is what I was trained in and knew the whole time what we should do. We just didn't do it.
Yeah, I wish we had done more because our kids, at least our eldest, understands and speaks Amharic. The others are a little shaky, super shaky. Kiswahili,
shaky is not the right word.
One of our kids is taking it in IB, so he's got some functional, but I don't know. Ernest and Rick, who are helping us out today, can tell us if his Kiswahili is any good. They're giving us a positive indication behind the camera. So see what else they're going to say. I know. But I wish we had done Kiswahili more. I wish we had really, really hammered that home. But maybe they'll get back to it. Solomon said the other day he wants to take Amharic in college so that he can keep it up for his kids. I was happy to hear that.
Yeah.
They're going to try and make up for our... So if you're listening to this as a parent who's struggling to cement language for your kids, don't give up. I think it's worth the struggle.
I think just the best thing we knew to do, which we didn't do, is one parent speaks in one language, one parent speaks in the other language.
Yeah, and just don't give up on that. Yeah. Oh, well...
Right.
Let me move on to another question that's maybe easier. So, you talked about earlier, so maybe it's a good time to come back to about the power of culture. I've never heard you say it that way, but I thought it was quite beautiful that you said that that's what kind of compelled you to take your focus from maybe an American lens of professional focus and make it African, because you were trained in education. You spent time teaching in the U.S. in what were Title I schools. So for those who don't know what that is, it's a category, the poorest schools who receive federal aid in the United States. So those schools are almost entirely Black and brown children. So that's kind of where you were focusing your teaching. That's where you were teaching elementary, middle school. And then at some point, you started your graduate work and the shift became entirely Africa. And you did your dissertation on the Ethiopian education system. Someone was asking me about your work the other day, and I said, yeah, Ben has been to more parts of Ethiopia than I have been. You went to all 11 regions at the time and really got to see that mismatch that you were talking about earlier. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute, because I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what really has also kept us here is the opportunity to work in development and work in these spaces to, like you said, hopefully contribute.
Yeah.
So in 10 to 20 years, Ben, how will you know that what you've been working on is actually working?
Yeah.
What are the outcomes that you want to start seeing that will show that evidence?
No, actually, my team, we have outcomes by 2025, so we have 2 years to at least make some progress on them. There's bigger outcomes by 2030. I mean, it's pretty simple. Look, the gap in education in the U.S., but specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, is not measuring whether kids are learning. And we have had so much investment, and countries in Africa have really meant the international benchmark, babe, for investment in education. It's about to be 20% of GDP
Wow.
of GDP and 5% of the budget. Many countries are in that vicinity. So they're spending money on the personnel, they're spending money on some materials, they're spending money on infrastructure. It's just that the combination of those things are not resulting in outcomes. So it is incumbent on us as societies to support the education system so that particularly poor, minority, and rural kids have the same academic resources and shot to show their skill level as the urban and wealthy. What's happening in so much of sub-Saharan Africa is it's extremely unequal. But then we still sit for the same exam. There was just the KCSE results released this year, and
here in Kenya.
And there's always celebration of the kid from the rural area who did really well. But the fact of the matter is that even the percentage of kids who sit for KCSE are much lower from the rural and poor areas. And there's the same exam, but the outcomes are different. But because it's an exam, it's easy to say, oh, this kid didn't study hard enough. When the fundamental reason why their outcomes are low is because the system and instructionally and materially around them was bad, was not enough, didn't give them the shot. And think about it, Lil. How many geniuses that Africa needs, Kenya, Ethiopia needs, exist in rural Africa, that because of the lower quality of education outcomes in those areas, it's not just that individual child doesn't have the opportunity, isn't doing everything they could do, it's that the country suffers because of the kind of loss of human capital. So to answer your question specifically, I think that we have a window of time right now where people are aware that there is a learning crisis, that learning outcomes are so much lower than they should be, and that countries and governments and teachers and the system needs to improve instruction to increase learning.
Okay, let's slow down. Improve instruction to increase learning.
Yes.
So is that what the focus is then? Improving instruction?
Yes.
How do you do that at large scale and make it simple for listeners here who are not practitioners in education?
Yes. So in most of sub-Saharan Africa, you have teachers who have been hired. Now, not everyone who is a teacher in Africa wanted to be a teacher when they were a kid, but leaving that aside, there are teachers in schools. They are often and usually quite well-meaning. They will do, if they knew what to do to help kids learn more, they would do it.
Yeah.
But the expectation for them is to cover a syllabus, to cover a set of content, and do all the things they're supposed to do. So they said, yes, I have taught grade 3 numeracy. That is a different request than to make sure that kids have the skills of grade 3 geometry, making sure that they're getting to the level of 2-digit subtraction effectively. And so what does it mean? Fundamentally, it means that we need to give teachers better support and better materials to teach the complex instructional issues that kids in grade 3, I don't know why that's the top of mind, but kids in grade 3 need. So what's worked at scale of late, that has really good evidence. Actually, the meeting I was just at in Sierra Leone was about this. It was 7 African ministers and their teams coming together. The meeting was called the Foundational Learning Exchange. So 7 African ministers and their teams meeting together to talk about this issue of the learning crisis and what they're individually doing at the country level to improve those outcomes. So in general, the thing that most of them are doing and investing the greatest amount of resources on are kids need to have books one-to-one that are structured in a way that allow them to
one-to-one meaning not 10 kids sharing one text.
Exactly.
Every kid having their own book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every kid has their own book. The teacher has a lesson plan connected to the book. And it's important to link those two things because it's complicated to teach, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where most people are bilingual or trilingual or multilingual. It's complicated to be able to teach the ability to decode English in particular and French in particular. You can decode Kiswahili very easily because once you know the letter sound, it's always a
phonetic,
letter sound.
Right?
It's phonetic. But in English, the letter U, it doesn't always say it says "u" in Kiswahili, but in English it's except when it's "you," except when it's part of "u." Right?
Yeah.
It's very different sounds. So I don't want to go. You stop me if I'm going too much in the details. But fundamentally, we need to have teachers with the tools to teach these complex things. They'll do it if they have the scaffolding and support they need. They need to have the lesson plans. Kids need the books, and then they need the training and support, which will allow that to happen. And that's working. I mean, in Kenya, it's probably the worldwide best case where learning outcomes doubled at a national level. Program was implemented in every primary school, implemented fully by the Kenyan government with some support. So those sort of things are happening in other countries. It is possible to do. It requires a high level of implementation expectation, and it requires governments, like we saw in Sierra Leone this week, governments to say it's important and we're going to invest the resources and time and focus from the system to make learning what matters, not just getting kids to school, but while they're in school to learn. So what I want to see in 2025 and then 2030 is that substantially more kids have the basic skills, and then we can move up the rest of the sector.
Let's make one more shift. Thanks, honey, for that.
Sure.
I think I've seen you labor at that for these last many years. So thank you for your labor at that. It's been important work. Let's shift a little bit back to America and the diaspora and some of those conversations really quickly as we kind of wrap this up, because I think you and I could talk a long time, but you have a meeting that you have to rush to. So we got to wrap this up.
It's a program working to improve learning outcomes at large scale.
Well, then we better let you go. You can't just be sitting on a podcast all day.
Yeah.
What am I doing? Yeah, You're right. Fine. Okay, so I want you to talk to your friends back in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And, people back in South Carolina that we knew. Friends back in Boston. What do they need to know about this part of the world that they still don't get?
I think, just part of it is the very simple misunderstanding of what Africa is actually like. Africa is like a room like this where you have technology and technical expertise who are doing world-class things. Africa has actually, babe, if you think about it from the human capital dividend, the possibilities that exist in this continent, the growth rates in young people in sub-Saharan Africa means that Africa is going to have a booming number of young, potentially well-educated people who can contribute not just to their national, economy, but to the world. So, if you back to my people in the U.S., if you want to invest in a continent that's going to have a return that's going to make you some money, this is the continent to do it. I'm actually quite a Africa optimist from an economic growth point of view. The U.S. Is much lower growth potential, and it's the best growth potential of anywhere in the rich world. I think there's talent here. I think there's expertise here. I think there's opportunity here. I think there's people here who can do it themselves. I think one of the things that you and I always complain about is the typical American who says, "Oh, I love Africa. Let me come help Africa." And the noises to no end.
Yeah.
Africans don't need help. Kenyans don't need help. These people in this room don't need help. They need the opportunity to apply their skills to a challenge in front of them and to do that well. And to the extent that we have a role in development, it's to be able to provide opportunities for the talented people on this continent to do well. So what do Americans need to know? This is a growth area. They need to know that the skill levels are high. And they need to know that they're actually suffering a bit stuck in America. I have a trip on.
We don't want them to come here. Don't say
exactly.
that. Just kidding.
I have a trip
Bring your
on,
tourism dollars. But
I have a trip on Sunday to the U.S. and I'm dreading it a bit.
So I'm going to talk to the diaspora because I think your message is well said to kind of Americans who are thinking about this space in a very black and white, a very singular story lens. I think I would add to that to the diaspora, that if you haven't had a chance to come back or bring your kids back, save every penny you can and try and make that happen. I think the value of seeing yourself reflected at every single bus stop, grocery store, on the news, at cultural events is so immeasurable and so powerful. It is restorative. It is healing. It is everything. It is everything. And I don't think we can ever underestimate that. And for the diaspora who's also looking for an opportunity to come back, I would say come back with also a vision of how you can plug in more deeply. I think what makes worth staying here as well for us in terms of not only saying, are we still contributing, is also the depth of relationship that we have with communities that are beyond ourselves. Back home in Ethiopia, I think it's trying to stay connected to places and purposes that we feel matter, that are, changing communities, that are making a difference, that are creative. I mean, for me, it's the creative industry, seeing my cousins creating, just leather tennis shoes, shout out Enzi, amazing leather goods, Rosette Basinica. I mean, it's just seeing like this amazing growth and potential that's there and wanting to be a part of it, wanting to be a part of that story. I think for somebody who grew up in the US and who is always looking for where do I belong, where do I fit, where is home, I'm so grateful that I've been able to both, I say thank you to Kenyans for giving us a home because we have felt so welcome in this country. And also to be back in Ethiopia and to be back on the ground here. I'm so grateful that we've had these years. I get emotional about it.
Well,
it's made a difference.
I also think we should help make sure people don't have too rosy a picture of what life will be like.
Sure.
You remember
it's not Wakanda, right?
It's not. Yeah, it's not Wakanda.
Yes, true.
But also, it's the problem is not that it's not the Wakanda. The problem is, or the Kenya or Uganda. The problem is that the diaspora person who has an idealized view of what the world will look like and needs to be prepared for the reality of daily life of a billion people who look like them. Yeah. That W.E.B. Du Bois thing of, they came to Ghana and threw their passports in the sea and they were there for a couple months and then saw a bunch of Black Americans on the beach hunting for their passports after a couple months because it wasn't that Ghana was the problem. It was that the people had an expectation of Ghana that was...
be ready to work, right? Yeah. Work it out. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. I mean, our first 2 years in Ethiopia in particular were very tough and I was ready to bounce. As the Ethiopian, I was ready to bounce. I was like, let's go. And Ben was like, let's stay. I love it here. I was like, you can stay. I'm out. So yes, you're right. I mean, you got to figure out taxes and living and schooling and fees and all those things that are... A life is what a life is, But I guess now that we...
Well, it was electricity and water that was really...
It was also power and water, basic services, definitely. But I think now...
Then we came to Kenya and it was like...
I know. Don't say that out loud.
You can cut it out,
people in Ethiopia might listen to this. But, I think it is, anyway. But now we're 15, 16 years down the road and we're like, we're glad we had the opportunity to stay. I mean, I just can't imagine our lives any other way. And our kids, I think, would say the same. So... Before I let you go, we always ask people 2 questions before we listen. Even though I know your answers, Ben, what's your favorite drink?
I'm a high class, as you know.
High class. Bring it to me.
It's a cold Coke Zero.
Coke Zero.
Favorite drink.
Oh, yeah. If anyone has a better option to Coke Zero, please DM me immediately. I would love to see my husband not drink Coke Zero anymore. Yeah. Okay, that's your favorite drink, we know. Okay, and Dr. Ben Piper, tell me what is bringing you joy.
I mean, I got to take an overnight flight from West Africa to Kenya and get to see my wife and kids today. I'm a very simple person. Coming home to see my family is what makes it worth it. Less sappy. I mean, there's excitement. I just going back to this meeting in Sierra Leone, seeing ministers at the table talking to each other. No, you should do it this way. When we were doing it this way, or Ivory Coast, this is what was working in Malawi. It's just it's just how it's supposed to be. Yeah. And I'm excited about that.
That brings you joy. Thanks for being here, babe. I know I get a lot. I'm fortunate to talk to a lot of people, but you'll always be my favorite.
It's now recorded, so
yeah, it's now you're going to play this back for me,
exactly,
aren't you?
For sure.
Love you. Thank you for being on Salam and Hello.
Thanks.
So listeners, thanks for going, listening to this episode and hearing a little bit more about our story and Ben's work. I hope it was meaningful for you too. We'd love to hear from you. So send us a message at lily@salamandhello.com, or you can find us at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Salam and Hello. I think that's the handle. I'm worn out after this interview. I can barely get through the outro. Anyways, thanks for listening and we'll see you next week.